Hey guys, so I have had a lot of requests on how I photograph my work, so I've decided to do a little video on how that process goes. As we all know, enamel is really hard to photograph or film because of all the glare, so I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks that I use in my little tiny studio. So here's my tiny studio. Not a lot of room to work with, especially if you want to incorporate a photography studio, and here is mine. I have a light box that I got from the Flashery. You don't have to use something like this. It wasn't that expensive. I think it was probably only $30, maybe at most $60. It uses a USB cable to plug in, has LED lights inside here. Pretty efficient on power because of the LED, and because enamel is not very large, I don't need a huge studio space. The camera I use most of the time is a Canon EOS Rebel T7, though you can also use your phone. The new phones these days have just as good as cameras as a DSLR, so if you don't have access to a DSLR, you can use your phone. I'm sure that it'll take just as good of photos that can be used on web or social media. Now, when I take photos, I like to have multiple different shots of the piece in different angles so that you can really see the detail. I like to photograph the backs as well, so that way you can see if I've done any fun stuff to the silversmithing. So I'm going to show you some of the ways that I will photograph a piece in the different positions so that you can really get a good look at it. I'm going to photograph this elephant piece I just finished. You can really see the glare on that piece, which is really annoying and makes it really hard to enjoy all the details that are really inside the glass there. So let's get started. How I have hung this piece so that it can be seen through that photography hole. I don't really know what that's called. I use these little clips. You could probably use clothespins or paper clip, any way to just hang that chain or whatever you want to use in order to display your piece. I like these two because they're plastic, so they're not going to damage the chains. I usually use snake chains for my pieces because they're really heavy duty, sturdy, and they feel really good against the skin. I can also adjust the angle with those clips on if I want the piece higher or lower inside the photography box. Next, I'm going to turn my camera on. And I damaged my camera, so I use the viewfinder pretty much all the time now. Unfortunately, I'm very clumsy. And I'm going to put it in manual mode because that's my preferred mode and where I can adjust the aperture and the shutter speed. So there you go. I'm going to zoom in, make sure that it's focused. Ludo does not like my camera. So LED light on its own, these LED light strips are not conducive for photographing enamel. Let me show you what it looks like without any diffusion. You can see all those little white spots on the top of the piece there, so that is the reflection of the LED lights, which is not ideal for photographing this piece. So what I've done is I've taped strips of tissue paper and even a little bit extra vellum in order to cover up my LED and really diffuse the light that hits the surface of the piece. This is really important, even if you're photographing indoors, outdoors. The more diffusion, the better, so that way the light can really penetrate the surface of the glass rather sitting on the surface, and you can see all the really fun sparkly details. So you can see that there's still a little bit of glare on the surface there on that bottom row of light. So I'm going to lower this piece down a little bit. It's also not quite in the frame. It's a little too high for my camera. So I'm going to do that really quick. So I still had a little bit of light hitting the surface. So I'm going to add a little bit more tissue paper. Let's see how it works. That's just about right. I'm pretty much there. So I'm going to take a couple photos in order to see how this guy looks. So before I take my photo, I want to make sure that I have the proper settings. I'm not a very good photographer, and so I usually try to find a setting by just going through it and taking a bunch of photos and seeing what works. Right now I have an f-stop of f8.0 and a shutter speed of 1/20. So let's see how that looks. Here we go, and looks pretty good. You can see that if I increase the shutter speed, it'll really darken the piece. So the shutter speed prevents light from coming through. So the faster the shutter speed, the less light, the lower the shutter speed. Too bright. This speed right here for my purposes is just about right. Next, I'm going to rotate the photo studio so that way I can get different angles. So I can photograph the piece laying down, on its side, on its back, and then I really like to do a standing up piece as well, really up close. So I'm going to show you that too. Okay, here's another angle I like to photograph, kind of at a side angle laying down. This is where the f-stop is really helpful. So the f-stop, which is right there, helps with adding a little bit of blur. It really pushes foreground and background, and I like to have really high f-stop when I photograph at angles because it really helps with creating more of a foreground and background with the piece in these different positions. You don't have to do that, but that's something I prefer. So you can see, there it is. Oh, I'm too close, so I have to adjust that means that I'm too close. And back up a little bit, do it again. Here we go. Beautiful. Angle number 2. Flip it. Oh, okay, hold on. There we are. That's the back. Next thing I like to do is I use a little bit of clay to prop the piece up. So I use, I think this is oil clay. You can use really any kind of clay, just something that is sticky and can hold the piece up in place without damaging the piece. So we're going to do that now. You don't need very much clay. There's just a small little bit. So it's going to go on the back of the piece. Let me see if I can film doing this. And I want the piece to stand up like so. So I'm going to do that and I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, so it's propped up in the right position. Let's see if it's too close to the camera or too far away. Let's see what the glare does. And I like to put my chains in front so you could see the chain, and I kind of like that it gives it kind of an organic look with the photography. So here's what that angle looks like. Now I'm still getting a little bit of glare from the lights of my studio. I think the piece is a little too far forward, so I'm going to move it a little bit farther back and see what happens. But it didn't quite work, so instead I'm going to use a little bit of vellum or tissue paper and try to diffuse some of that light that's coming in. So you could do so just by creating a little bit of a hut or house to diffuse the light that's coming from above. Let's see what that looks like. It's a little bit better. So I can't do this with my hands full. Oh, so I'm gonna take a photo and see how it looks. It's a little dark, so I'm gonna try changing the shutter speed and see what happens. So I went from 20 to 13. I'm going to go down to 8. So let's see. So that looks fabulous. I really like that. And I can make any changes and edits in my editing programs. Sometimes I also like to photograph my pieces outside, sometimes in grassy areas or natural areas. So this right here, it's like somewhere an elephant might be. So let's see how I can make it work. Sometimes I'll hold the piece up like this and have a green background. Other times I'll lay it like so. Try to get a good light on there. Kind of like this look. So the piece shows the elephant in the bush. So I'm going to take a photo of it in this position. So that's how I go about approaching my photography. Next will be the editing. So we'll download the photos off of the camera and put them on my iPad. I'll show you what programs I use and how I use them.